Sequels are meant to build on what made the original game great, right? They should take everything we loved and make it even better. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. Some video game sequels just miss the mark, disappointing fans who were excited for more. In this video, we'll talk about some of the most disappointing video game sequels that left players frustrated and wondering what went wrong. Without wasting more time, let's get into the video. Duke Nukem 3D is widely considered one of the most iconic first-person shooters of 1990. At its release, it captured the attention of gamers and became a landmark title in the FPS genre. However, the journey of its successor, Duke Nukem Forever, tells a very different story. When Duke Nukem Forever was first announced, there was immense hype surrounding it. Fans eagerly awaited what would surely be the next great game in the franchise. However, as years passed and development dragged on, the excitement slowly turned into skepticism and eventually indifference. By the time Gearbox Software acquired the rights and released the game in 2011, many were simply shocked it had finally come out. Sadly, the reality of the game was far from what players had hoped for. Duke Nukem Forever felt like a product stuck in time with outdated game mechanics that made it seem like a relic from the mid-2000s. The core gameplay was equally disappointing. The shooting mechanics never felt satisfying, and the game often halted the action to force players into tedious puzzles or mini-games. The levels were frustratingly linear, stripping away the sense of freedom that players had come to expect from FPS games. Everything in the game felt forced, as though it was trying too hard to capture the spirit of the original Duke Nukem games, but failing at every turn. The Dead Space series started strong, with the first game receiving widespread praise for its terrifying atmosphere and innovative gameplay. The second installment built on this success, refining the formula and arguably improving on the original. However, Dead Space 3 took a sharp turn in a direction that many fans felt completely ruined the series. One of the biggest problems with Dead Space 3 was its shift toward a more accessible and profitable experience, driven by EA's desire to appeal to a broader audience. In their attempt to make the game more commercially successful, they ended up damaging the franchise, which would take nearly a decade to recover from. Some of the design choices made in the third installment are baffling. For example, the custom weapon system, which might sound interesting on paper, doesn't really fit in a survival horror game. While it's fun to create different guns, it takes away the tension that is central to survival horror. In previous games, managing limited ammo was a key element of the experience, but now with ammo being universal, players never feel truly short on supply. This makes the game less about resource management and more about creating overpowered weapons that render most combat encounters trivial. The co-op mode, while a decent addition, felt out of place in a series that had always been about isolation and survival. Though it worked better than other aspects of the game, it still didn't mesh well with the overall tone, further highlighting how the game had strayed from its roots. Released in 2014, Sacred 3 was a major departure from the earlier games in the Sacred series. The franchise, known for its deep RPG elements, loot, character customization, and vast world exploration, saw all of these features stripped away in the third installment. What remained was a shallow, unimpressive beat-em-up with a few multiplayer options and unfortunately some weak, unfunny jokes. While Sacred 3 includes some minor references to the previous games and at least one returning class, it's hard to recognize it as part of the Sacred franchise. In fact, it's difficult to find much resemblance to the series at all, making it feel like a completely different game. The original developers of the Sacred series, Ascaron, were not involved in the making of Sacred 3. Instead of continuing the legacy of epic open-world action RPGs, Sacred 3 transformed into a mediocre linear beat-em-up. Unfortunately, even as a beat-em-up, the game struggles to deliver an enjoyable experience, often falling flat. For fans of the first two Sacred games, Sacred 3 is a disappointing misstep. It lacks the elements that made the original games stand out, and if you weren't aware that the development team had changed, you'd likely be confused by the game's drastic shift in style and quality. In short, Sacred 3 is a hollow shell of its predecessors, and a far cry from the ambitious RPGs that fans once loved. Command & Conquer is often remembered as one of the best real-time strategy games of its time. Known for its fast-paced gameplay, fun mechanics, and memorable soundtracks, the franchise became a staple for PC gamers. Titles like Red Alert were especially beloved, offering both thrilling strategies and a touch of humor, with characters like Tim Curry bringing extra flair to the experience. It was a golden era for RTS games. However, as time passed, the popularity of the RTS genre began to decline. The once thriving community found its focus shifting, leaving games like StarCraft as the last major players in the genre. To adapt to the changing landscape, EA made the drastic decision to overhaul the Command & Conquer formula in an attempt to keep the series relevant. The result was Command & Conquer 4: Tiberian Twilight, a game that deviated far from the series' roots and left many fans disappointed. Command & Conquer 4 is often described as a mess. The game abandoned the strategic depth and tactics that made its predecessors popular. In place of these core elements were convoluted progression systems, strange single-player content, and a poorly executed conclusion to the beloved Command & Conquer story. The game's difficulty is not challenging in a good way, but rather feels like a tedious grind. This has led to a reputation that preceded the game, warning potential players to avoid it. As a result, few people have played Command & Conquer 4, and it is widely considered a disappointment in the series. The game's failure to deliver on its promise has left a sour taste in the mouths of fans, and it serves as a cautionary tale of how not to revamp a beloved game franchise. The latest installment in the Mass Effect series has received a significant amount of criticism since its release. Unfortunately, most of the negative comments are valid. The game was heavily criticized for its numerous bugs and poorly designed character faces. Although the developers attempted to address the facial issues, the other problems persisted. The game was intended to mark a new and exciting direction for the series, with a new protagonist exploring a new galaxy and searching for a way to ensure humanity's survival. The game introduced new alien species and conflicts, offering a wealth of possibilities. However, the execution fell short. The story feels like a less engaging remake of the original games, with similar conflicts but lacking the same level of interest. The companions are also underwhelming and fail to leave a lasting impression. The gameplay loop, which involves exploring planets and establishing colonies, had potential but was marred by tedious and filler-like quests. When the story does pick up, it is often forgettable and lacks the high stakes that a game about humanity's survival should have. While some aspects of the gameplay have improved compared to the original trilogy, others have taken a step back. The game features a large open world with planets to explore, but the exploration feels repetitive and bland. Many of the side quests are forgettable, and the worlds themselves lack the depth and variety that made the original Mass Effect games so engaging. The original Crackdown game was a thrilling experience, offering players a fun-filled adventure as they explored the city, collected orbs, and caused chaos. Although it lacked depth, the game's simplicity was part of its charm. A sequel presented an opportunity to build upon this foundation, adding more complexity and depth to the gameplay and narrative. Unfortunately, Crackdown 2 failed to deliver on this promise. Instead of enhancing the game, the developers removed many of the enjoyable elements that made the first game so entertaining. The sequel's lack of innovation and creativity is staggering, leaving players with a dull and unengaging experience. One of the most notable disappointments is the replacement of the original game's unique gangs with zombies. The first game's diverse and complex enemies, each with their own strongholds and bases, added variety and character to the city. The game's missions primarily revolved around closing zombie holes, which quickly became repetitive and dull. The downgrade didn't stop there. The gameplay loop was uninspired, the graphics were unimpressive, and the overall experience felt empty. The lack of creativity made it hard to stay engaged, turning what could have been an exciting sequel into a disappointment. While Crackdown 3 had its own flaws, at least it avoided the tedious mission design that plagued Crackdown 2. In the end, Crackdown 2 serves as a lesson in how removing key gameplay elements can ruin a once promising franchise. At first glance, Dino Crisis may appear to be Resident Evil with dinosaurs. However, this survival horror game quickly set itself apart thanks to its innovative AI, creative puzzles, and strategic focus. These elements help the game stand on its own, offering players a unique experience. The sequel, Dino Crisis 2, shifted gears, moving away from the slower, more methodical gameplay of the original. It ramped up the action by throwing a wide variety of prehistoric creatures at players both on land, sea, and air. The second game also introduced a surprisingly deep storyline diverging from the established lore of the first installment. However, when Dino Crisis 3 was released, it quickly caused the series to fade into obscurity. At first, the absurd premise of dinosaurs in space seemed like the obvious culprit for the game's downfall, but the story wasn't the only problem. In fact, the real issue with Dino Crisis 3 lies with its camera. It's often so difficult to see where enemies are. Players will find themselves shooting blindly into the unknown. Another major flaw in Dino Crisis 3 is the lack of variety in the enemies. While the developers had plenty of opportunities to introduce new types of dinosaurs, there are only 3 basic enemy types aside from the bosses. The lack of variety made battles repetitive and less engaging. The poor design choices and lack of attention to detail in Dino Crisis 3 ultimately led to the series' downfall. The game just didn't have the same tension or excitement that the first 2 games had, and it ended up being a forgettable entry in the Dino Crisis series. After the critical backlash of Mega Man X6, Capcom was eager to shift direction and take the Mega Man X series in a new and bold direction for its next installment. While the X series had always followed the classic 2D platformer formula, the developers decided to transform Mega Man X7 into a cel-shaded third-person shooter that blended 2D and 3D elements. However, in their attempt to reinvent the franchise, Capcom lost sight of what made Mega Man X games enjoyable in the first place. The result was a game that, despite its ambitious changes, failed to deliver on key elements. Mega Man X7 suffered from unbalanced weapons, lazy level design, forgettable music, and tedious gameplay. Players also experienced frustration due to frequent dialogue skips during crucial story moments. This not only made it difficult to follow the plot, but it also caused confusion during key missions, as important details were lost in the transition. One of the most egregious issues was that players could not control Mega Man himself for the first half of the game, despite him being the title character. This felt like false advertising and left fans disappointed. While the Mega Man X series has traditionally been known for its impressive boss battles, the reploids in X7 were uninspired and lacked the creativity that made previous bosses memorable. In the end, Mega Man X7 serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of overambition without the foundation to support it. While Capcom sought to bring something new to the table, they neglected to address the fundamentals that made the Mega Man X series beloved by fans. The Alone in the Dark franchise is one of the most influential in gaming history. The original game, released in 1992, is widely credited with pioneering the survival horror genre. However, its 2008 reboot, also known as Alone in the Dark 5, failed to live up to its legacy. Unlike the atmospheric Lovecraftian mansion setting of the original, this reboot takes place in New York City. Baylors assumed the role of Edward Carnby, now reimagined as a gritty protagonist battling supernatural threats. The game aimed to deliver a cinematic horror experience, but the execution fell short in several areas. One of the biggest problems with the game is its clunky and unpolished combat. Despite being a big-budget release, the mechanics feel awkward and unresponsive. The controls are unintuitive, making even simple movements frustrating. It's clear the developers aimed for something unique, but instead, the gameplay feels sloppy. The game is riddled with bugs, some of which can completely break progression. A particularly infamous car chase sequence can become impossible to complete under certain conditions. Perhaps this is why the developers introduced a feature that allows players to skip any section of the game at will. While the game is not completely unplayable, it is ultimately a disappointing experience. As a curiosity, it may be worth exploring, but it is clear that the reboot failed to capture the essence of the original Alone in the Dark. The game's poor execution and numerous flaws make it a lackluster addition to the series. Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 is notorious for its poor reception, and most gamers have heard about its flaws even if they've never played it. If you're one of the few who haven't experienced this infamous game, you might wonder if it's truly as bad as people claim. At first glance, it may seem like the game is so bad that it could be considered so bad it's good. With its endless bugs, cringeworthy dialogue, and awkward scenes, Sonic 6 certainly has a lot of elements that could make for a guilty pleasure. However, the real problem with the game goes far beyond these issues. It is not the awkward romance, frequent crashes, or poorly delivered lines that make the game unbearable. The most frustrating aspect of Sonic 2006 is the excessive loading times. Every time a character is spoken to, the game takes around 30 seconds to load the conversation. This may not seem like a lot, but it disrupts the game's flow and becomes tedious. To put this into perspective, imagine playing a game like Skyrim or Grand Theft Auto, where every interaction with a non-playable character is accompanied by a lengthy loading screen. This would completely ruin the gaming experience. The problems with Sonic 2006 are a testament to why the game received widespread criticism. In fact, the game's developer, Sega, was so disappointed with the final product that they removed it from retailers to protect the Sonic franchise's reputation. This move speaks volumes about the game's quality and is a clear indication that it is best avoided. And that wraps up our list of video game sequels that just didn't cut it. It's always tough when a sequel falls short, especially when we're so excited to see what's next in our favorite franchises. But it's all part of gaming, right? Some hits, some misses. Let me know in the comments if there are any sequels you think should have made this list, or if there's one that surprised you in a bad way. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.